Hi, my name's Glenn Butt. I'm a born Canadian and I understand the reason why we have Remembrance Day, but I don't fully understand why we remember. And that's why I've taken this opportunity to talk to people that have lived it. I don't want to learn through books in the library or videos. I want to talk to the people that were there during the wartime. We're going to talk with a World War I veteran, and we're also going to talk with a young cadet that's in the service right now. My Uncle Jack served during World War II and was wounded. I never really had the opportunity to talk to him and learn from him. And it's through these people that I want that opportunity to learn why we remember. We're going to begin with Mr. Fred West, a remarkable man, a World War I veteran, who he and his wife, Elmira, have welcomed us into their home. Let's go there now.
Well, the first medal I got was for shooting down a German airplane. We'd just taken this knoll, we called it. It was a sort of a knoll which you could see for miles around. And we'd taken it by surprise in the morning. And the next day we were going another 5,000 yards. But we got to this place and we stayed there for the day. We needed ammunition and rations to come up, and we had to send troops back for that. And while we were there, we were told not to shoot at airplanes because we didn't know if we had enough ammunition. But this airplane came over, and it was too much of a challenge. It was so low. You could see the observer standing up in the plane with his camera over the side of the plane taking pictures of us. Well, we didn't want that. So I took a shot at him. It was just a burst of 10 rounds. It was a lucky shot. Now, there's no doubt about that. It was lucky. It was about 10 rounds, a burst of 10 rounds. And he came down. And I got the military medal for that. If I hadn't have got the medal, if I hadn't have got the plane, I'd have been up for court-martial for disobeying orders. But disobeying orders now in those days were the thing. But the bar to the military medal, I always tell everybody I got it in the rations, because that's what we always said to anybody asks us about a military medal. Oh, they come up in the rations. So I can't tell you, honestly, I can't tell you what I did. The officer told me what I did, but I couldn't remember it. So I let it go at that. What he did tell me, I don't want it on record. It's fact. I don't want it on record.
Aside from the honorary medals, you have quite a medal that Elmira is holding. Could you just tell us about that? That's amazing.
Well, I didn't know what happened. The first set of uniforms in the First War, we didn't have pockets in our pants. So we carried everything in our tunics. And your money, I used to carry my money in my tunic pocket. Now, I saw a fellow that had a prayer book, and in the middle of the prayer book was a bullet, right in the middle of the prayer book. Well, I didn't have a prayer book in my pocket. I had some coins. And we were going along one day, and all of a sudden I found myself on my backside. I didn't know what it was. I felt a pain just under my heart. And I got up, and there was a hole in my pocket. I put my hand inside, and I pulled out,
Elmira's greatest treasure.
yeah, at half-crown English money. It had taken the brunt of the piece of shrapnel. I don't think it was a bullet, because it had to be a piece of shrapnel.
It's close to the edge of that coin.
I remember one time we were getting ready to go over the top and make an attack. We always call it going over the top. And before we went over the top, you went into no man's land, so that you didn't get the German shells on the trenches. You got into no man's land. But you start out early in the morning, and your barrage starts before the 0 hour. That is the time you move. But this was early in the morning, and there's a bit of fog, and it was getting light so that you could see through the fog. But we saw this fella coming along, whistling away, whistling his tune, and all of a sudden a shell landed right at his feet, and we could see him turning it. I won't use the usual language. And dropped down. We figured he was dead. So we watched him for a minute, and the barrage hadn't started yet, not our barrage. And he gets up, shakes himself, picks up his rifle, throws it over his shoulder, whistling away. He got to us in the front line. "Where you going, fella?" "You stop right here." He stayed with us for a couple of days, and then he joined his own regiment. He was lost. And well, there was the guy in the front line trenches, you know, the honey buckets are downstairs. Veterans will know what the honey buckets are, so I don't need to explain. Before you go on a trench, you down for the front, go on duty for the night, you see, on the frontline trench. You presumably relieve yourself in the honey buckets down in the dugouts. Well, this was a recruit, and he didn't. So he gets up on the front line on guard, and halfway through the night he had to go. Well, you don't do it in the front line trench, that's for sure. And one fellow told him, he says, "A pile of dirt out the back there, get out the back." So he goes out in the back, and all the mud, you know, and he gets down doing his job, and one of the fellas, well, you heard a shell coming over, and picks up a lump of mud, and he whacks it at the guy, and hits him right in the bum, you know, and he jumps up. I'm hit, I'm hit, I'm hit." And his pants goes down over his knees. He falls head first in the mud. Oh yeah, we had a lot of laughs out of that. But, well, I think the last, my last stretch in France, you know, we would advance until the Germans would shoot at us, and we'd stop, stay there the rest of the day, because we didn't want to get men killed. And at night, the Germans would move back. So the next morning, we would advance. And about 30 days, we were on this sort of thing. And we were in the water over our boots. We were soaking wet all the damn time. That was a miserable time. But as soon as we got back to camp, my name had come up for vacation, and I was glad to go. We we got a bath. It's funny about the bath, you know. You come out for a bath and you hang your uniforms up and your underwear and everything else you throw to one side in a pile. But your uniforms would get fumigated to kill all the lice in it. You know, you were lousy from the time you stepped in France till the time you stepped out, and you'd get clean underwear, and your uniforms would be okay, and you'd be clean till you got back to camp. Then you get lousy again. But anyway, I went on leave and came back. We were in Calais when we came back from my vacation. There was a group of us, lots of us there. And we were sitting around a hut there talking about how we were going to find our own regiment, because you had to find our own way back. And we were gone 2 weeks, we didn't know where they were. And all of a sudden, all hell broke loose outside. Bells were ringing, whistles blowing, shouting and dancing, and all the lights were on. We went out to find out what it was. Well, armistice signed, 10 o'clock at night on November the 10th, but it was to take place on at 11 o'clock, November the 11th, the next morning. But we was there on 10 o'clock, November the 10th. So we had quite a time, and after that we started out to find our regiments. And took us a couple of days. And we were there, I was there 1 or 2 days, and we started our march to Germany. We marched from France or Belgium, well, I don't just know where we were. A place called Fosses. But we left there and we started our march to Germany. Over 300 kilometers. Every day we'd go so far. The shortest trip was 5 kilometers. That was the last march. We left a place called Untereschbach in Germany. And that's where we we went to Untereschbach in Germany to stay for a month, 6 weeks before we started coming back to Canada. But the shortest march was 5 kilometers. The longest march was 42.5 kilometers in 1 day. And all we had to eat that day was onion water. The cook had some onions, but that's all they had. So they boiled up the onions, and that's what we had with our iron rations. And then we on our way back to Germany.
It must have been quite a feeling of relief on November the 10th.
Oh. Well, while I was looking for my regiment, going up, we passed the team of Germans that were coming in. They were coming in a big German car with a white flag flying on the side. Those were the officers that were going somewhere to sign. Well, I forget the name of the place, per se. Anyway, we passed them. Of course, we didn't realize because they went by so fast. So, I don't know. I can tell you this, on Christmas Day, some other Canadian regiment were very generous to us. They swiped our Christmas Day dinner. Huh. And I will say this, for the mayor of the town in Germany, he gathered what he could from around the people in town to give us a bit of a Christmas dinner. But we got our Christmas dinner later on, but we never found out who swiped our dinner. It's the First World War. And people forget it. What the boys went through in the First World War. There's a lot of argument. You can turn this off if you like. But there's a lot of arguments going on about the turbines and all that. But nobody has explained why we honor the dead. And they've put in, the First War veterans put it in. Not the second, I'm not taking anything away from the Second World or anything like that. But the First War veterans put it in, and we had a reason to put it in. It was these fellas that died this horrible death by gas. The other stuff, being blown to pieces, that's all right. Other wars did that too. But this gas, nobody will ever get that again. It's really, it was horrible. I know I went through gas attacks and I was scared as hell because I can't smell. I never could smell. And I always had to depend on somebody else telling me. Of course, if a shell came over, a gas shell came over, you hear the plop. You're used to that, you know what it is. You're warned right away. But if there's gas that's let out of canisters, like the first in 1915, you don't hear that coming. You see it, but you don't hear it. But at night you don't see it. And you have to depend on somebody else. Believe me, I always had my ears open. I was the first one to get his gas mask on when somebody flipped a wrapper and rattled around. Oh yeah. But those fellas that went through the gas attack, those that got killed at the time, they were lucky. It's the guys that came back and had to suffer the rest of their lives. They don't know this. Nobody's told them this. And they should hear about it. That's why we honor our dead by uncovering our heads when we go in the Legion Hall. Nobody's told them this. People would understand if they knew the real reason why. It was the 1914, 18 boys that put that in. And I'm only one of about only 3,000. I left of about 600,000. Last I heard, there were 4,000 First War veterans, but I heard this some time ago, and they're dying off fast now. And they put that in, and we should keep that in. See, the Legion is not a public. It's a private club. It's not a religious club, it's not a political club. It's a club for veterans. And we honor our dead by uncovering our heads, and that's the way we should. And any veteran that doesn't do it, he shouldn't be a veteran. That's the way I say.
Fred West certainly had stories of tragedy, but he also had stories of humor. And while in Bowmanville visiting Fred, I decided to talk to three other ladies who talked to me about their involvement with the war here in Canada. Gloria Grant, Meg Gibbs, and Irene Whitney.
I was just completed high school. And I was working at a telephone office, switchboard operator, in a small village. And then I decided it was time that when I became 18, it was time that I joined the service.
And what did you do with the service?
I was stationed at headquarters in Ottawa for the time that I was in, and I worked in an office.
What were you doing in headquarters?
Worked on publications. All the manuals that were sent out to the different Air Force stations were sent out from my office, the office where I worked. And there were a lot of civilians there, but the supervisory personnel was all Air Force, and it was in Ottawa, down on what they called Victoria Island. It's gone now. There's nothing there left. There's just a plaque to say that we'd been there.
Yeah.
That's all that's left.
The medals that you carry on your jacket,
These are my two service medals. They're the 1939-45 Volunteer Medal. The War Service medals. I wasn't
I was going to
overseas.
say something really
we'll come back to just a moment. Maggie, you've got the chance to say something now.
Okay, I'm Meg Gibbs, and I did all my service overseas, and I was with my whole family when war started, and Winston Churchill announced it on the radio. We were sitting there, and that is one of the memories I have. And we all wondered what was going to happen.
What were you doing in the service?
Pardon?
What were you doing in the service?
I was on radar. I started off the beginning of radar. That was the incept of radar. And we had, about 5 different radars. Each one got better as the years went on. We was in it, 4 or 5 years, and so it improved. And I've been in a radar station still since then on the West Coast. A brother-in-law of mine works on the radar, and completely different again. So you know how things have changed in all these years. So.
What sort of activities were you doing within the...
Well, I was on the there was 3 boxes at first. I was in the receiver. We'd get zips for the aeroplanes, German aeroplanes. If it had a shadow at the back, that was our plane. If it didn't have a shadow at the back, we'd give the information to the guns, and they'd shoot them down. We didn't always hit, but sometimes we hit. But we kept them away. And that got better all the time. In fact, just as I was leaving, the B-1s and B-2s were coming over. We hit them every time. That was an American one. It was American-made radar then. So they all altered, all got a little better over the years, you know. And,
when you were leaving, what year were you leaving then?
When it was all over. And I had to fight to get over here because I was married to a Canadian. And boy, they wouldn't even let me to get over here until I was demobbed. So I had to have an argument with them. But,
And you won.
well, no, I just had to tell them that my father was a newspaper reporter on the Daily Mail, and that he was wondering why I couldn't get out when we weren't doing anything. And I soon got it then. It was very nice.
Irene, what functions were you performing during the war?
Well, to start off with, I started to work at Ajax and the munitions there. And we were doing the big 65 millimeters, and we were capping them. And the cap is the cap that goes on the end of the big long shells. And they were ready loaded. The only thing that wasn't, the detonator was not set. From the tables, they were put right into the boxes to be shipped. And they were shipped right from there right out. Well, I met 4 girls, and we chummed together most of the time. At that time, they were paying 45 cents an hour. We heard about Duplate in Oshawa, and they were paying 50. And when there was a bad storm at Ajax, everything was shut down, and we were really scared. Because if anybody even touched any of those caps, they could blow you up. So we said, well, we'll get out of there. So we came to Duplate to work. And while we were in Duplate, we all decided, well, there's nothing here. Let's go somewhere else. Because Duplate did offer us 50 cents an hour, so that was a little bit better money. So we went up to Toronto one morning, and we signed up. So we were staying up there for the day. So they asked us where we were staying, and we told them, and they said, fine, we'll call you this afternoon, you'll have your medical. That night, we slept in barracks.
Oh, boy, that's quick,
weren't
isn't it?
long.
Yeah.
When the CWAC started up, they were right after every girl they could get a hold of that would join the service.
Good.
From there, I took 4 weeks basic training at Trinity Barracks and the Armories in Toronto. And then Kitchener was opening up for the women. But at that time, there was half men there. So we had to move the men out to bring in all the women right from across Canada to give them their basic training. So finally, that was number 1, Kitchener, the main depot. Then, after 2 weeks, I finished my basic training, and we were all called into the 4 of us were called into the office. Went into the office, and they said, you're taking an NCO course. We took the NCO course. We stayed at it for about 1.5 years. We said, we're not getting anywhere here. Let's see if we can get into a trade of some kind. So I decided I would like to be a driver mechanic. So I reverted, went in as a driver mechanic. And from then I started teaching driving and even driving a tank. And in the Star Weekly, during the war, there is pictures, and they're out at the museum, Oshawa Museum, that shows us with our tanks and our trucks out there.
Is that right? What is NCO training?
Pardon?
The NCO training, what was that?
NCO, that was basic training. Teach you how to march, first aid, look after yourself, how to handle anything.
Well, the actual letter is NCO, is non-commissioned officer.
Non-commissioned
Yeah.
officer. Yes.
That's what NCO stands for.
Yeah.
And that's,
You never asked me what that was. That means I took part in the war. See, they've got all these other medals, and I thought I'd better just tell you what, I've got one now.
Unfortunately, the feeling was among the civilians that we girls were following the men, and we didn't. It was too bad, but we weren't given credit for what we did.
Well,
No,
you
not to
weren't
start
being
with.
bombed, and that makes a
No,
difference.
no,
But when
that's
you're
true.
under fire, anybody goes in,
Oh, yes.
and you were the leaders of that, coming
Oh,
over
yes.
here, and that made the
That's
difference.
right. Oh yes, because
Yeah.
some people
Oh,
did
yeah.
really look down
Yeah.
on the girls that went into uniform, especially if you came from a small community. I came from a small town,
Yeah.
and I was the first girl. There was 3 of us actually
Yeah.
from the town that joined up,
Yeah.
and I know that there was people.
yeah, well, there's only
said
about 4
things.
from Oshawa that joined up.
Yeah,
Oh,
But these other girls that I was with, they came from all over.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was 3 of us from Orno. Actually, it was Orno where I grew up, and I know that there was talk there. But when I went home on leave, my mother marched me to church on Sunday, and I
yes.
must
Oh,
wear my
yes.
uniform.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Mhm.
yes.
No matter where you went, Dad used to say, you don't take that uniform
Oh,
off.
I know. My mother
Like you
was
come
very
home on
proud
leave
of
for
me.
the, especially for New Year's Eve, and you wanted to go out for New Year's Eve. Dad says you wear that uniform out, or you don't get out that
well,
door.
the women were like inducted into the army over a certain age
Yes.
in England. You had no
Well,
choice
yes.
unless you had
Was that?
18 to 21.
But yeah, there was no
18,
conscription here.
There was
A lot of
conscription
people
there,
thought there was.
Towards about the middle of the war, because the men, look how many got killed
Yes.
at Dunkirk, all of those places. They had to have people to take the place.
We had quite an experience really with the British Air Common Training Plan, which brought Air Force men from all around the world, and we had them training at different air stations in Canada, and that was interesting because you
Oh,
met
yeah.
people from all over the world.
Yeah.
And I know some of them said about where the girls conscripted here, and they couldn't believe that we weren't because there were so
Yeah.
many of us. But it was
Nearly
interesting
all the
to meet
pilots
people.
I knew was trained in Canada.
Yes.
Every one of them.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
they were all.
I've got a boy in the Air Force now, so I hear all about it. He's a pilot in the Air Force. And I still meet some fellows that was trained in Canada, and brought over there. Yeah.
Oh yes.
I enjoyed talking to Gloria, Meg, and Irene. They're all members of the Ladies Auxiliary, Royal Canadian Legion Branch 178 in Bowmanville. Next up, we spoke with the president of that branch, Mr. Jim Connell. What is it that the Legion branch here get involved with annually?
Well, annually we have like our armistice service, which we have all around the area in Bowmanville, Newcastle, Orono, and Newtonville, and that's on once a year on the 11th day. Orono, they have theirs the week before, that way the school kids and Cubs and Scouts and Brownies can attend, which is nice. We should have that here, but we felt a lot of the veterans felt it should be held on the 11th. So it should be.
Any other events that take place?
We have our Vimy Ridge dinner, which we have Mr. Fred West, our World War I veteran. He's the only veteran we have from Vimy Ridge, and we have a Vimy dinner once a year, which he attends, of course. which is a real, like a very remarkable man. I'm sure you know you've talked to him.
Yes, absolutely.
And with the Sunnybrook veterans, we bring them, our ladies auxiliary bring them down once a year from Sunnybrook Hospital, and we put on a dinner for them, a hot dinner for them, and some entertainment, and they sort of look forward to that once a year. Other than that, we do a lot of things in the community, of course, for the youth, try to get them more involved, and so they know what the veterans, what the war was all about.
Do you feel that the youth are coming more involved lately?
I believe so. I know I've talked to some younger children, like I'm grade 1 and 2, and it amazes me on how much these kids really know. So it's nice that they are being taught this in the school. I know I was brought up with it. I had a father that was in the Second World War, and heard a lot of stories. But I like to sit down and talk with some of the veterans because I find it quite interesting, you know, and what they went through, how they went through it. I'll never know.
You have been president here for several years. That's quite an honor.
Yes, it is. It is quite an honor, and to be quite truthful, I spoke before how I got involved with the Royal Canadian Legion back in Toronto. When I lived in Toronto, they asked me to join the Legion and to play hockey for them. And I never thought that I'd ever be the president, but to me it's been quite an honor, and I've really enjoyed it. I've met a lot of interesting people.
Just let the viewers know how many years you've been president?
This is my 6th year.
And every year is a new election.
Every year we have our elections in May, and I've run for the last 6 years, but I've enjoyed it. It's had its ups and downs, good times and bad times, but I've really enjoyed it. Like I say, I've met a lot of interesting people.
For many young men, it was the Air Force that was their calling during wartime, to be a fighter pilot, and that's exactly what Bill Mackinson has done. He was a World War II fighter pilot and eventually flew Lancaster bombers. I spoke to him about his involvements and being trained right here at the Oshawa Airport.
Well, really, I should explain that back 52 years ago, I was one of many student pilots at Oshawa, and here we are, course 91, at Oshawa Airport, which was the pride of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan at an elementary basis. So that is one of the pictures, and the other is here, a picture of a typical air crew of those days.
As far as war time, what did you do within the service during the war?
Well, I was trained as a pilot and graduated from high school at 18, joined the Air Force at 18. And when this picture was taken at Oshawa Airport, I guess by that time I was 19, just about to leave, graduate from elementary school to go to service flying, to fly more advanced aircraft.
Did you have any experience before enlisting as a pilot?
Not at all, other than making model aircraft, not at all.
How long was your training?
Well, the training here was 6-7 weeks. It was a few months at service flying, then a few more weeks at advanced flying before a wings parade.
And then you were now graduated, and what followed?
Well, what followed, we graduated as sergeants, and some of us were fortunate enough to become officers. And after some further advanced training, we went overseas. Not all of us, but many of us.
Could you maybe tell us a little bit about your experiences overseas?
Well, I think it's important to realize that most Canadian pilots somehow ended up in the Royal Air Force, or at least attached to the Royal Air Force, which as far as I was concerned was grand. It wasn't until later on in the war, and bear in mind I was only overseas in 44 and 45. It was later on that I got posted up to a bomber command in Yorkshire, number 6 Bomber Command, which was Canadian.
Now you were trained as a single-engine fighter pilot, and you ended up in a bomber.
Yeah, well, actually what happened, when I think about it now, I was one of the smart Alex that stood up when some Royal Air Force wing commander mentioned when we were overseas where we were going to be posted. And I realized that somebody near me said, that's a 4-engine conversion unit. And I was the idiot who stood up and said, excuse me, wing commander, I'm a single-engine fighter pilot. And he said, Sonny, and that's what he called me, Sonny, you're going to be flying fighters, 4-engine fighters. He was right. A few days later, I was being checked out on a Mark IIIA Lancaster, 4-engine fighter bomber in Yorkshire.
You had mentioned previously that although you had gone over in 1944, there was something about the 42 Corps DF that you wanted to talk about briefly.
Well, I must say I was really upset when I remembered some of those great Canadian fighter pilots. One of them, who was a few years ahead of me at high school at North Toronto Collegiate, Don Morrison, who was well decorated from the Battle of Britain with his DFC, part of his DFC, DFM, and so on. And Don, bless his heart, over Dieppe, where something like 147 of our pilots were killed during that battle, Don, bless his heart, shot down a Focke-Wulf 190 German aircraft that was shooting up the beaches. Unfortunately, the debris of that aircraft came back and damaged the Spitfire, and he had to go into the channel. And after he got picked up on a launch, he was such a great guy, he got off the launch and rescued another Canadian pilot who was drowning in the channel. And I guess I was upset when I watched what was supposed to be a documentary. And as you watch the documentary, that air battle, which was the most horrific of the war, never happened. What can I say, Glenn?
Yes.
But there were many other stories like that, including people like Bill Kane of Oshawa, who managed to make it back in his destroyed aircraft back to England. And he survived. He's gone now, but he survived the war.
Any particular stories that you like to tell about your experiences? I understand there's something about a taxi.
Well, taxis, yeah. It just so happens today I have a guest in my home here in Oshawa. And this gentleman's an old World War II Spitfire merchant, driver he calls himself. And bless his heart, he still complains every time he sees me, but when he was on leave in London, if there were any Canadian Air Force officers in London on leave, he could never get a taxi. Now, I got to agree with him, because the taxi drivers would drive along the street, and they would pass British Army officers, they'd pass Royal Air Force officers. If they spotted a Canadian Air Force officer with the Canada badges on, they'd always pick him up, because they knew if the fare was 10 shillings, they'd get another 10 shillings as a tip. So the RAF officers knew they'd never get a taxi in London when they were on leave.
As far as Oshawa goes and the airport here, it played a significant role within the war, not just in training Canadian pilots.
It was the pride of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, and trained many pilots on an elementary basis. And I was pleased to be here for 5, 6, 7 weeks, and went solo here in Oshawa.
And loved Oshawa so much that you've actually made your residence here just north Oshawa.
Exactly, because every instructor in those days had a little area where his students would go. And mine was in the northeast corner of Oshawa. And after the war, I bought land up there. Then 18 years ago, my wife and I built a home northeast of Oshawa.
You had the aerial view and you picked it out. That's where I want to live.
Exactly.
Now, you're telling the story as well about the fact that your landmarks, rusty roofs, aluminum roofs, were your landmarks of getting back to Oshawa.
Well, you must remember, back in those days from Oshawa Airport, we were flying Tiger Moths with, cruising speed of 75 miles an hour. We had no radios to talk to the tower. So my instructor said, Mackinson, look down there at that farm. That's got a rusty roof, metal roof. That farmer's got a white house. That guy's got a brick house, boom, boom, boom. And I had all those landmarks, so I knew where I was. But he said to me, if you ever get lost, all you have to do is fly south and you'll hit Lake Ontario. Then he said, let me correct that. An Air Force pilot is never lost. He may be momentarily uncertain of his position, but he is never lost.
We're at the Colonel Sam McLaughlin Armory, home of the Ontario Regiment. We're going to go inside and talk to Mr. Don Chapman and Mr. Charlie Black. Don Chapman is a former World War II Army instructor and current president of the Ontario Regiment Association. And Mr. Charlie Black is a former Korean War veteran. I asked them about their involvements during wartime.
Well, to start with, I only weighed 110 pounds. I didn't have enough weight to go overseas. When I joined the Army, they didn't know whether to take me or not on account of my weight. Finally, the medical officer said, we'll give you 6 months. If you can keep up with the other fellas, you're in. If you can't, you're out. And I wasn't discharged until 6 years later. I started out as a gunnery instructor up at Camp Borden, in Meaford. When I lost my hearing, I was transferred into the stores. I stayed there till the end of the war.
A former warrant officer, class 2?
I was a warrant officer, second class, when I was discharged.
And now the acting president of the Ontario Regiment, and you've been president for several years, annual elections, and the Ontario Regiment Association, of course, Durham Region, very, very proud to have that distinction. What sort of functions do you get involved with nowadays?
I'm a life member of the Sergeant's Mess. I'm an honorary Chief Warrant Officer of the Sergeant's Mess of the regiment. I managed the kit shop. I was the fundraising chairman to build the new cenotaph you see out on the south wall. It came to some $25,000. And we just raised the funds to buy garrison buckets for the regiment. You might say I'm the regimental gopher, too.
And you do have a desire to get the youth involved and get them into the regiment. We were talking a little bit about that. Maybe you could expand a little bit more on your feelings there.
Well, the veterans, as you know, are aging. They're passing away, and our membership is going down, down, down. We're interested in bringing in members, gentlemen of good character, with or without military service, to keep the association going. We're very highly respected by the regiment, and it's something that we shouldn't let die. So any young fellows want to join, just contact the regiment order room.
You have some proudness, as just not too long ago, your youngest son, Robert, has received some honors, and maybe you could let us know about that as well.
Yeah, my youngest son, Robert, was just promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, and is now the commanding officer of the regiment. I keep telling him, I taught him everything he knew. But he didn't believe that. He was always, even as schoolboy, he was always interested more in the outdoors, the Boy Scouts. Sometimes you go away in the middle of the winter, I think, geez, you'll freeze to death. But he was always interested in Boy Scouts and military. He has, I think, some 22 years service. I'm very proud of him. When he was first promoted, I went into his office. I just breezed into his office. He said, did you make an appointment to see me? I said, I'm making one for right now.
Charlie, what does the Korean War mean to you as far as what were you doing during the war times of the Korean War?
Just before the Korean War, I was out working up in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories in the mines, and got tired of that as a young fellow. I wasn't attached then. So we came to Edmonton, and then there were big recruiting posters looking for people to go join. It's supposed to be a police action in Korea. Well, it turned out a little bit more than a police action. It turned out there were a lot of people getting killed. Quite a bit of, how could you say it, civilians getting killed for no reason. So it turned kind of nasty for a while, but we did our job. We went around trying to keep the peace. That's what we were trained for anyway, more or less, just to try and keep things smoothed out so people didn't get dominated. And it worked pretty well.
trained as a peacekeeper, though, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into a battle situation?
Yeah, because we didn't have that much training when we went, because it was just right after the Second World War that this Korean conflict started. And I only had about 3 months training to do it. And when we got to Korea, the first thing I was pushed is the battle adjutant's driver. And we used to have to go up to the front and check all the things out. And then before we know it, we were pushed right into the thick of it. But it planned out pretty well.
There's a significance to the green blazer that you wear. All Korean War veterans wear the green blazer?
The green blazer, yes.
Why is that?
It was just adapted as a color because that's our colors of the Korean Veterans Association. So it was formed just right after the Korean conflict, after the boys got over and the armistice was signed. That's when they start adapting the green blazer. But we all carry our own regimental beret, and we carry on our pocket, we carry our own PPCLI Vicious Patricias or the artillery or the Air Force, whatever it is, usually.
This vehicle, built for World War II, is the very first off the line here in Oshawa. A radio vehicle that has a home at the Oshawa Military and Industrial Museum. A home thanks to the chairman, Lieutenant Colonel Norm Wilton. I spoke to Lieutenant Colonel Norm Wilton about his involvements with the war. He was a paratrooper who dropped behind enemy lines hours before the D-Day invasion of Normandy. He is also an organizer of the events that took place on the 50th anniversary pilgrimage back to Normandy.
I was an infantryman. Wound up with the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, trained with them in Fort Benning, Georgia in 1942, and we went overseas and joined the British 6th Airborne Division as one Canadian battalion in a 10,000-man division, and wound up at in the D-Day invasion, and later we were the only Canadians involved in the Battle of the Bulge, which has received a lot of interest over the years because it was mostly an American operation. And then we did the Rhine crossing. It was our 2nd parachute drop. And we then went up across Germany when finally the war was coming to an end. We went up on foot up across Germany and hitching rides and all. And as I say, we were the first British forces to meet the Russians up there. So it was party time when they came along. They were headed for Denmark, actually, and our people put the halt to them. But the reason that being Canadians in a British battalion, we had quite a few people with us and our members that could speak Ukrainian and Polish and all as Canadians can do. So our divisional commander put our division at the point, and this is when they met the Russians at a place called Wismar up in the Baltic Sea.
You were very much a part of the 50th anniversary pilgrimage back to Normandy, and I want to get to that in a moment. But first of all, let's go back to June 6th, 1944. You were there, and you dropped in. Could you just tell us the story?
Well, our chore as a division was to protect the east flank of the beaches, and it was the Americans who were on the opposite flank to protect the other beaches, so that we also not only to capture some bridges that they needed later, and we weren't involved as Canadians, but it was very important that the British landed in the middle of the night in gliders and took these bridges. And it was our job to, I say our C Company was the pathfinders. They landed early. They went in and to secure our dropping zones. our A Company blew a bridge over the Deves River and also supported the British 9th Battalion at the Mireville Battery. It was a massive battery that was aimed at the beaches, which was successful. And our B Company secured and destroyed a bridge across the Deves River to prevent the Germans from bringing armor up so that they could attack the beaches from that side. And then we retired to secure positions on a hilltop so that the Germans couldn't then attack from that side again. And we were there for quite a while. So that's the D-Day story.
Just hours before the invasion, you parachuted into...
Oh yeah, we were there about midnight on the...
Behind enemy lines.
Right. Well, there weren't enemy lines as such at that time. The enemy was confused. Some of them were on leave and some of them were in training. But the first place we landed was strangely enough, was a dividing line between the German 7th Army and the German 15th Army. And when you get two units or two outfits working close like that, sometimes there's confusion at the line, and then I think that worked to our advantage too.
Now, just this year, you were involved very heavily with the 50th anniversary, and we'd like to just talk about that and the medal that you received. Oh yeah,
well, all Canadians who were in the Normandy battle, not just the D-Day thing, but the Normandy battle, which was some of the fiercest fighting of World War II as far as Canadians were concerned, we had to apply and prove that we were there with the Canadian government. And we were issued with this medal that is shown here. It's called the Normandy Medal. It was issued by the French government to us, and I happened to receive mine from the mayor of Cherbourg. So that tells the story on that one.
South Oshawa, the shores of Lake Ontario. That's where Sir William Stevenson could be found. And why? Because this is the site of Camp X. Secret warfare training was conducted right here in South Oshawa, but not too many people knew that, including Captain Alec Hill. As he was trying to enter into Canada to visit relatives in Oshawa, the RCMP stopped him and questioned him. A Royal Navy veteran from World War II and master of ceremonies at the Oshawa Cenotaph for many years, we spoke to Mr. Alec Hill about his involvements with the war and the Cenotaph.
States in February 1943 and did a number of courses with the various American engineering companies and went down and spent a while at the famous Naval Academy in Annapolis. And you could say this was killing time, but I learned a lot about American engineering equipment. And then I was told that if I had any relatives in the United States or even in Canada, it might be possible to go on a leave. So after negotiating for a while, I said, well, I have an aunt and uncle in a place called Oshawa, Canada. I wouldn't mind going up there. That brought up a bit of a problem because I didn't realize at the time there was a problem with Oshawa. There was a rather secret type of installation in the area, and I was interviewed by the RCMP in New York. Why did I want to go to Oshawa? I said, well, simply because I have relatives there. I have an uncle who's serving overseas with the Canadian Army, and I said, I have a cousin who has just been invalided out of the Canadian Army, and I'd like to go see them in Oshawa. Oh. After a period of time, I was given the approval. And when I arrived in Oshawa, my aunt said to me, you must be a pretty important guy. I said, why? She said, well, the RCMP were here twice inquiring about who you actually were. And you know, it was only, Glenn, after the war, when they had a kind of a Camp X reunion function down at the Armory that I realized all the parts fell into place. I realized what they were doing. They were just checking me out completely because of the Camp X situation. Well, now, to go back to my, I had a very fine visit in Oshawa. I was in Oshawa June and into July 1943. And whilst I was here, I made contact with a rather beautiful construction downtown. it was called Memorial Park. And Oshawa wasn't a very large city in those days, but I was rather taken by the beautiful cenotaph they had there. There, after a few days visiting, I realized that there were stones from all over the fighting area of World War I. Also, there was from Westminster Abbey a stone that had been donated by George the Fifth, and also there was a large piece of stone brought from Vimy Ridge. I never really forgot the cenotaph, and some years later, in '56, I came to Canada. I was a young teacher, and joined the Canadian Legion and became active, particularly with the Remembrance Day service. And from '67 until '92, I conducted that service on behalf of Branch 43, Oshawa. My good friend Bishop Woolcock, he and I cooperated very much on that particular effort. But towards the end of the '90s, my health wasn't all that great, so I decided it was time to quit.
The Oshawa Military and Industrial Museum is home of many artifacts, and it's also considered the home for Chris McDonald, as he volunteers many hours here with the Ferret Club. Chris is a young cadet who spoke to us about his pilgrimage on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, and also the experiences that children and teenagers went through during wartime.
Well, we're affiliated with the Hastings and Prince Edward County Regiment in Peterborough, and I believe there's a detachment in Coburg as well. We wear the red berets as part of a battle honor because we received the most battle honors during the Second World War, and we're sort of nicknamed the cherry berries, but we prefer red berets. Our cap badge has the elk on it with the crown of the Queen. Our cadet corps, we won the Strathcona Shield this year for being the best cadet corps in your certain area. And our cadet corps has just recently finished a rappel tower. We built our own rappel tower up at Sir Sanford Fleming College. We do a lot of projects and things like that, and that's the reason why we win the Strathcona Shield.
How long have you been a part of the Cadet Corps?
I've been in for about 1 year and 4 months now.
Yeah. How old are you?
I'm 16.
16. Now you had an opportunity that not too many people could ever say they're going to get, and that was the opportunity to go to Normandy, but even more so than that, there was the entire 50th anniversary on the QE2, and you're around all those veterans, youth representative. Let's just talk a little bit about that. Bragging rights time now.
Okay, well, what we did is we left New York Harbor on the Queen Elizabeth II. We left for a 10-day cruise across the Atlantic Ocean. All the way across, we had just perfect weather. We had there were ceremonies always on board ship, like for men who lost their lives on board or in the Atlantic crossing. We had a ceremony for that, and we had different little ceremonies and things along that line, just to sort of honor the veterans and the men who did lose their lives, and women as well. And once we got across the channel, we went to Southampton, and we stayed there, and we went off on bus tours to Gosport, where the Canadians embarked for Normandy, and there was a ceremony there in which the Prime Minister was at. And from there, we went back on the ship, and we went out into Portsmouth Harbor, and we were there for the Royal Review by the Royal Yacht. And from there, we embarked to go across the English Channel to France, and we docked in Cherbourg. And from there, we took bus trips onto Juno Beach, and there were ceremonies all along the beach there. One which included about 250 military vehicles from the Keep 'em Rolling from Holland, I believe is where they're from. They came and parked right on the beach.
And you had the opportunity to talk to a lot of those veterans, and how did that make you feel inside as a youth?
It made me feel proud to be Canadian and proud of what many of our relatives and family and friends did for us 50 years ago to sort of keep our freedom. It was just unbelievable, some of the stories that you hear. Some of them make you laugh, some of them make you cry, but they were just excellent.
You have quite a family history as well within the military.
Yes, my grandfather, McDonald, he was in the RCAF. He was down in Trenton and Mountain View Air Force Base. He was a firefighter. And my other grandfather was in the Royal Canadian Regiment. He served in Italy, Sicily, and a little bit of Africa. And my grandmother was in the CWAC. And my great-grandfather was, he was in the First World War. So there's quite a background.
You volunteer your time quite extensively here at the Oshawa Military and Industrial Museum, and we chose this vehicle to stand in front of because you can tell us all about it. Go ahead.
Okay, this here is an M113 CNR, which is Command and Reconnaissance. Its nickname is the Lynx. It's 10 tons. It has a 6V53 Detroit diesel engine. It'll do around 100 kilometers an hour. It's just came out of the Canadian Forces about 1.5 to 2 years ago. They were using these over in Bosnia. They're like a UN purpose vehicle, but they're just a patrolling vehicle. The Canadian military's had them since the late 60s. And they're basically a 3-man crew, and they're made of aluminum magnesium. And they're just a fun vehicle to drive.
And that's just it. You drive this.
Yeah, I've been volunteering for the Ontario Regimental Ferret Club for many years. My stepfather, he's the president of the club, and he's basically got me into it. We've spent the last 15 years have been spent restoring these vehicles. We have a large number of them, about 45 vehicles in different stages of repair. And with work on vehicles, we work on them every Wednesday evening and Saturday morning, and we do a lot of extra things sometimes. We do parades, we like to do parades and show off to the veterans and the Canadian citizens to see what the military was like, what they were driving 50 years ago, and just to sort of preserve Canadian military heritage.
What are your future ambitions?
I'd like to stay with the Cadet Corps until I have to retire, and from there I'd like to go into the militia until I'm finished school, and then from there I hope to join the regular force.
How do you feel the youth responding to the cadets and getting involved with being into the Cadet Corps and eventually into regular service?
Well, I think there's no better place to learn leadership and different skills, Army skills, than in cadets. It's a great way to start. It's a good reference.
Do you see a lot of kids getting involved?
Well, before they used to have cadets in the high school, it was mandatory, but they don't have that anymore, so a lot of there's not as many youth involved in the cadets as there was, but there's still interest there, and as long as there's that interest, there will always be people who will show up.
I asked a common question amongst the people I talked to, and that was, what do you remember on Remembrance Day? A common thread amongst all of them was their friends and their family. I was over in France. We had a chance to visit Benny Semer,
and the beaches in like Juno Beach. And what I remember is just by seeing all those graves of men no older than 23, like in their early years, like their supreme sacrifice for our freedom, as well the women as well, who were very heavily involved. Also the industrial side, the men and women who were back here working painless hours of industrial work here, just to help fight the war and to help the Canadian war effort. And just remembering those is basically what, and to honor those men and women. That's what Remembrance Day is to me, is to honor them.
Well, Remembrance Day to me is a time of memories. Many of the young people that I had gone to school with back in Ireland were members of the forces, and unfortunately many of them didn't return. I used to catch up on that information when I'd come home on leave when I lived in Ireland. When I'd come on leave from my ships and say, well, what's happening, Mother, so-and-so? Well, so-and-so was killed and so-and-so. With the result that even though most of my memories of comrades that I lost are mostly overseas in Ireland and in Britain, I still feel that I have a lot of thought for the Canadian veterans who made the supreme sacrifice. And in effect, this is why I was so interested in taking part in the Remembrance Day service in Oshawa, and was very glad to do it for the spell of 25 years.
I have a feeling, you know, it's a personal thing, but I don't like to say that these fellows gave their lives. We were all at risk. Their lives were taken. Their lives were taken by their friends and the government that sent them over there. And so I see that, but that's a personal thing with me. Their lives were taken from them, and most of them relatively young people too. So the average age of my battalion when I went in was 22 years of age. So a lot of young Canadians buried in France, not just my battalion, but all of the activity there, and plus Italy, and of course the terrible battles in Holland later, which they're going to be visiting in the coming spring. But that's my memory of, and thinking on it in terms of the Remembrance Day.
I had a very good friend. We went to school together. Same hobbies. You see one, you see the other. We went away, our family went away. Albert always came with us. His family went away, I always went with them. He joined the Air Force. We used to double date together when we were teenagers. And he joined the Air Force, and he ended up as a navigator in a Lancaster bomber. And he was shot down in the sea. Defended both. Many days I think of him. What would happen? Where would he be today? Would we still be friends and so on? We're very close, like, eh? And Remembrance Day I think of even more. So many young people sacrifice their lives. And there's people today that don't even realize that. What would happen if we'd have lost the war? Did you ever think about it that way? So that's my Remembrance Day. I'll stand down there at the cenotaph, my mind will be with him.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing that with us, Don. And for Charlie, what does Remembrance Day mean for you?
Almost the same as Bob, because I was in the community where I grew up in Montreal, East End. We were about I guess, 30 to the bunch that used to hang around together. And I was too young to join. The other ones were a few years older than I was. And when I left Montreal to go out west, I got a call from another friend of ours that apparently 6 of the guys that we chummed around with, they are all gone, different places. There was a couple of them in Dieppe. And like I say, I was too young to join them, so that's why I went out west and started joining in the PPCLI once I came back from the Yellowknife. And my day is trying to remember all my friends, and even some of the chaps we went to Korea with didn't make it. And it's just more or less spending the day thinking of them. And if more young people would get involved, like I'm with the Cadet Corps downstairs, and even the young fellows now, we're teaching them to be thankful for what they got.
Father died, as a matter of fact, 29 years ago, and of course, I remember my father every day of the year, but I remember the veterans, a lot of them that I knew of that were in the war, and I've heard of a lot of people that never came back. Like we have one lady, there's 3 brothers from Bowmanville here who were all killed, the Colville brothers, and this lady lost all 3 sons in that one war. And when I met the cenotaph that day, things like that go through my mind when they read out the names of the fellows that didn't come back. And it must be terrible for the families. I don't know. Like I say, I look at a man like Fred West, and I wonder what they went through. I couldn't. I know I would never want to go through it. If I had to, I would. But I don't know how these men, how they could cope with this.
You're right. The thought of all that scares me too.
Yeah,
to face this.
And it's just too bad that a lot of younger people didn't know, and you like to see them get involved, or get to know more about it, because once our veterans are gone, that'll be the end of it.
The feeling that I have that there are so many people who don't remember. Granted, we've got to the age where there's so many of us gone, but the young people today, I think they've picked it up a little bit in the last few years, but there was a time when we were just sort of shoved back. And I really do have a feeling that the government is shoving us back on the back burner. And to me, that's very sad. We have veterans in Sunnybrook Hospital, and if you want to see something, you go to K-Wing, and you don't forget. And as long as there are veterans alive, the veterans need to be remembered. And I do get the feeling that so often the government just shoves the veterans on the back burner, and because they're all younger people in the government now, and it's 3 generations, going on 4 generations since the war. So it's understandable, I guess, but they still need to be remembered.
Thank you. And Meg?
Well, I go to the cenotaph to put the wreaths on, and to start to play the last post, and I cry like crazy and I have to go out. No, it's just a lot of friends that we lost over there, and you just think of all of them and just think, look at the lives they could have had, and they weren't allowed to live it. And that's, war is like that, and we've got to remember that.
When you served, you were with the British Army.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And now being Canadian, do you remember a lot of the Canadian friends?
Oh, definitely. I married a Canadian, see, over there. And of course, I knew all his friends and kept in contact with them when I came over here. They married Scotch girls, Irish girls. A lot of them came over, and we kept in contact. Well, I still Hamilton now. A couple of them there. And no,
That's wonderful.
We kind of fled them around. No, it was a very, you lived every minute of your life the way the things were at the time. You didn't have no time to waste upon things that didn't matter, But no, it was, and the Canadians were well looked after over there, I can tell you. They thought they were great. All the British people really looked after them. Oh. And they looked after us too. That's what they were over there. Why they came over, they were the first contingents that came over in December '39, yeah. And I thought that was great.
Thank you.
That's why I married one, you see.
Irene, what does Remembrance Day bring back for you?
Remembrance Day brings back for me, I was asked to carry the colors for Remembrance Day not too long ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I was standing up with the colors and the band was playing, and I just thought back, my father, my husbands, my uncles, my great-grandfathers, right back to the Boer War. What a waste of life. What a waste of life. I broke right down. They had to take me out. I couldn't stand there any longer with the colors. Everything just upset me. And another thing I can remember, while I was convalescing in Westminster Hospital in London, Ontario, and they were bringing back the boys that had been injured over there, and some were real bad. Some no arms, some no legs. One particular person was this young fellow that came in, and his wife was there, and she was pregnant. I knew that he couldn't have been overseas any longer than 9 months, well, maybe 8 months. And she says, "I'm so glad to see you back." Why do we have these things? I'm glad it's over, and I hope we never have any more.
Mm. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
I hope we never have any more.
Amen.
Let's love our neighbor as we do ourselves. And that means everybody, not just Canada, the whole world.
One man. Every Remembrance Day, I remember this. Give me a glass of water. We just, as I told you before, this knoll, we just captured that, and I placed my machine gun down, and there's two machine guns in this section, in a platoon. And my best friend, Johnny Walker, his name was George Walker, we called him Johnny. And he was in charge of the other gun. The rest of his section had gone back for rations, and they hadn't come back. And I'd placed my gun down there. We'd just taken the place. And Johnny came over and he says, "Sliver," he says, where do I place my gun? See, I was senior, so I told him, well, over there was a pile of rubbish. And I said, "Put it over there for now." Well, we were talking, and I said, "That's where you put it." But as we were talking to him, I saw a hole come in his forehead, and he dropped dead at my feet. I always remember that. Every armistice, and I've been to a lot, I've always remembered that.
My uncle's medals mean more to me now that I've had the opportunity to talk to these people. From Fred West to Chris McDonald, it's been my pleasure to talk to each and every one of the individuals we spoke to. War veterans, those that are maimed in body and soul, and those that are in fields around the world, should be remembered. If you have a relative or a friend that served or lived during wartime, you should take the opportunity to talk to them. I never had the opportunity to talk to my uncle, and I wish I had, because I've learned something by talking to these people. I've learned why we remember.
Like a diamond it gleams in sunshine and in rain, drawing those who pass to stand and stare, its message lighted by the spirits of young men. Pass not this stone. It beckons to the traveler on his way from graves in Europe, Asia, and the mighty deep. It hearkens in the bustle of daily life. Pass not this stone. Pause and think a while, their spirits say, of why our names are inscribed upon this slab. Still a while, the bustle of the day. Pass not this stone. Grieve not for us whose names are listed here. We choose to dare and counted not the cost. Then you will pass our stone, not in sorrow, but with pride, and you will live as nobly as we died.